you representing?
Oh, so many, so many.
I think you probably have a conflict of interest because in one breath you're advocating for spending that in fact is going to jeopardize the ability to fund something else you're advocating
But
for.
Sarah, you know, I can choose. I can bring minutes.
I know.
We are live?
Okay, so Senate
You didn't hear
appropriations.
my remarks about qualified admitters.
Of course I did
No, I didn't think you did.
um,
They were nuts.
Senate appropriations, and we're meeting and we're going through the language in the House passed version of the 2023 budget.
Yeah.
So Stephanie Barrett's here to help us get started on the language, and then then at 3 we will take up other witnesses.
So the packet you have in front of you and is on the committee page is the C, D, and E parts of the bill. And so I thought it was a good idea just to walk through the language, because I don't think we ever walked through the governor's original language, when he put the budget
Did I
down.
just throw the language away?
The packet that looks like this,
It's like this.
pretty thick.
I think I just threw it away. One baby. Sorry, I didn't get it.
No, you threw it away.
That's pretty bad.
All right.
I give you for you.
Thank you.
Yes, it's the least I could do. All right.
See what I think of this bill?
All right.
So the C section, as you might recall, these are the sort of further budget adjustments. The C section is, all of it is effective on passage. And so this is usually a mix of money and language. So C101 is an amendment added by the House. The substantive part of it is that new 3 on equitability. It is a mystery of what's happening on sub A.
Yeah.
As an amendment. This is the language that was in the bill last year. It's adding that new sub 3 and then
3, the equitability.
Yeah.
Determine the extent to which gaps in educational access and success are being reduced. As soon as you've got a baseline.
Everybody would have to give their financial information to somebody.
Well, they probably do.
Well, other than applying for aid, who else is this gonna require you to give it to?
Do we have a position from the state colleges in terms of their ability to even do this? Or what it would take to do it?
I'm sure they must have talked with Representative Fay as well.
Would you, your education?
Yeah.
We'll see exactly what that requires and,
I've already made appointments in my area to go through language.
on the state college?
No, in, for DCF.
Oh, all right. Well, all right, let's keep going then. That's,
there's a little bit more sort of an amendment on the bottom of page 2 in the same section on the state colleges. Just last year's language was specific to honor before March 2022. And this changes it to updates to the plan and an annual report on its implementation shall be presented to same house. Community corrections and institutions, Senate Committee on Institutions.
okay, and that's their 10-year for fiscal plan,
It's
really.
really your strategic plan for managing its physical assets. I don't see any other amendments for the rest of this section on page 3.
Oh, yeah, they change makes sense when you're talking about a 10
Oh, at
year.
the top of page 4, current fiscal year. Enrollment statistics for the current fiscal year as opposed to specifically for fiscal year 22.
Well, let's go through and just close out where we think it makes sense. Changing, getting rid of to that date specific for a 10-year plan. People okay with that change? We'll just close it. Chrissy, you're gonna follow this.
Yep.
And the same is true with changing to current fiscal year. So we'll agree with that.
And then we'll find out, we'll ask the state college if they have a follow-up on the equitability.
Yeah, I
They
think
added.
Phil's adding that to his list.
Yep.
So C102 is, this was a oversight in the budget adjustment bill. This subsection C accidentally got cut off in the back and forth of closing in the conference committee. This is the FY '22 end of year construct. This was the language that just lets any balance, we have a $52 million waterfall for '22. And if we have money above that waterfall, it just sits in the
This
general
one
fund.
didn't get included in the final?
There was a mix up in the back and forth on which version of it got sent to Chrissy and the C got cut off in the end. So that's why it's here. I do have there's the technical correction in the lead into this. It should say 22 Acts and Resolves number 83, section 53 is amended by adding a new subsection C to read as follows.
And I've done all, I just put that in, so
We
that's
just
all
have to
set.
correct the lead
So,
in there.
well, I think we're fine with that technical correction, because we did intend to not allocate it in the year, it shall remain in the general funding carry forward, so that's okay. With the changes that you just talked about.
In section C103, this is an amendment to we had amended this section in BAA, where we had added the next year of the critical occupations. And the change here from the House is primarily the new, at the very end of the section, the new sub 6 EI, Masters in Clinical Social Work, is the new added piece. The technical amendment the technical letter from the administration is also asking that you add a master's or doctorate in psychology to this. I don't think there was actually any master's work funded by the critical occupations
No,
because it was
there
all
wasn't
fully
any.
subscribed on the undergrad level. But if there were funds available.
There's masters and a certificate of advanced graduate studies, but it says school psychology. So we do have psychology, it's just school.
And so I know the social work was specifically a request from the House Human Services Committee. And the master's or doctorate in psychology is in the technical letter from the administration.
Well, it's kind of it's more of an academic discussion because
We never have
we
full
never-
subscription at the undergrad level.
All right, so
So,
they didn't add social work then, did they?
They did, that's the main part of this amendment. They
down at the
corrected-
bottom, yeah.
it's the very last thing, and the administration is suggesting that you add a 7th.
yeah, well, if we're doing advanced graduate studies in school psychology,
Why don't we just get her a school?
I-
And make it psychology.
Right.
That would cover school and anything else.
That's right.
We could do that.
as long as it, yeah, I don't see where we would make it flexible for them.
Well, all right, so now we'll just change it, master's or advanced graduate studies in psychology and add the clinical social work. All right, everybody all set on that?
Yeah.
Okay. This is out of debt savings, Senator Sears, that's a Tonsino.
But,
This is specifying what the out-of-state.
yeah, but
savings
under,
would be.
I'm sorry, but A1 doesn't make, I can't understand what they're trying to get at. In the last line on page 5 and the top of page 6. Is that for offenders?
Community-based domestic violence intervention programming for individuals under Department of Corrections supervision.
Right,
And ensure that programming is free of charge. And to create domestic violence interventive programming and curricula. So it's both the programming for the incarcerated person and the,
is that for incarcerated people or is it
or
for?
people, supervision, not incarcerated, people under DOC supervision, so they're out.
Where is that? Tell me that.
Second to
So,
next line.
For individuals under Department of Corrections supervision and ensure that the programming is free of charge.
Okay,
But
Oh, it could be either or. It could be
It
doesn't
both.
really make
you could
sense.
be in jail and you're under supervision.
But expand community-based. I don't know if community-based would be in a incarcerative setting.
Right,
No, probably not.
And then it's also to create the programming and curricula.
Do you want to take a look at that, Dick? I mean, that obviously,
Yeah, I
this is justice reinvestment.
where did it
here.
come from?
The house,
It was, so I think it was probably,
I think it's
probably
more
from
the
the
wording that's
institution's
troubling.
correction, the institutions,
Yeah, but it's more the wording that I find troubling. It's the way it's worded.
um,
Created for who? Those
individual,
under supervision or?
yeah, what it says. Community-based for individuals under supervision. Well, shall we hold that and we can take a look at
Yeah.
it? Okay.
and the B part of this same section, it's got sort of a technical issue in it. I believe they're trying to refer the 417 that's in the budget 22, and it's actually duplicating, appropriating it the way it's deleted. So this might have been sort of around, a version of language that came from house institutions and then got wordsmith to its
Yeah,
detriment maybe. And
you
then
know who drafted this section?
I don't know if it was a counselor or if it was actually, committee members themselves.
Can't imagine. They must have had somebody
But
drive.
these dollar amounts, the 417 and the 360 are the amounts that DOC has reported is available for the Justice Reinvestment 2 type activity.
But you're not looking at that whole section.
Well, I
You may
don't
have-
understand it.
You might have different ideas about how you want that money spent as well.
Well, I just don't want to be using this to defer other expenditures that are going to take place anyways. Like the diversion. I want to make sure that the 417,000 isn't just supplementing, not using.
Well, it says it shall be used for community justice centers, the 417.
Yeah, but we fund them otherwise, right?
It's funded from someplace.
Yeah, we do fund them, I think,
So
through.
what-
There was a grant line with correction.
Yeah, so what I'm concerned with is instead of, if this is new money and additional money for them, fine, but I don't want to be supplementing what we're funding already with justice reinvestment money.
So I believe that the details on the money is, I have from Matt, thanks, but I think this is one time only available in FY22 money, both pieces of it. But I'll double check that with you.
All right, so we'll hold all of this, that section for now.
And I will forward you that email so you can understand what's in the base and what's one time, because we had out of state bed savings, at the close of the year. Last year. Section C105, this is the home and community-based 10% bump. We had this language in the budget adjustment. Definitely it's a big update because we updated the plan. It's an estimate based on how much that 10% is gonna draw, and it's actually turning out to be a little bit higher. The estimate's going up.
So
And then,
Stephanie, I have a question.
Yeah.
When we get the bump, or
Yeah.
when we get a increase in our match rate, is our cap adjusted to that higher?
so it doesn't affect the cap, it affects which dollar, is it a?
No, my question is, in other words, the largesse of giving a higher match rate and more
Yeah.
federal dollars, does that federal dollar in fact put more pressure on the cap?
This home and community base, as we understand it, does not. And I
Okay.
don't know if it's perfectly clear, but I think the agency is thinking that the home and community base, this 10% 1 year, the bump is for 1 year, and the plan to spend the proceeds of it that does not, it's outside of the waiver.
That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, but the underlying base map, you know, it doesn't go up with that, that simply is a, you know, the underlying base map simply
No,
says.
but, all right, so let's say our match rate's 55%.
Yeah.
And it goes up to 57.
Yeah.
Obviously, the match rate is bringing more federal dollars. Do those additional fall, in other words, does the benefit of a higher match rate have a negative impact on the federal funds that are accounted toward the cap?
Yeah, it's a, it's a total cost in the cap, it's a per member per month cost. And the fact that a higher federal match creates more state capacity, so you could spend more, that hits up against the cap, to spend more than you otherwise would if the match had gone up. But if you're not spending more, it doesn't, the fact that the federal share went up and the state share went down doesn't affect anything.
That's all
Yeah,
So all of the enhanced match rate during COVID didn't go against the cap.
No, it didn't go against the cap, mostly because we actually scooped it out to the budget. We didn't.
No, I get that, but we drew down more money.
Well, we drew, that,
And
the
that,
6.2 is
that,
a tremendous amount.
yeah, that extra money we drew down didn't go against the cap.
No, it didn't,
It's all
the
announced.
6.2 itself did not have pressure on
I
the cap,
didn't
it's only
think it
our
did.
spending decisions that have.
That's what I'm
Pressure on
trying
the
to
cap.
confirm.
So,
Sort of like they give it in one hand and take it on the
yeah,
other.
and that, and this particular 10% bump is $149 million of spending that would otherwise not have happened if it's all contained in this home and community-based arena. But that,
But the
it-
149 is
it's now,
gross.
it's its
It's
own,
gross.
it's gross. It's the value of the 10% bump grossed up.
Yeah.
And it has to be accounted for separately. And the real amendment here is on page 7, which is the appropriation of money for FY '23.
And the 10% will go away when?
10% ends, it ends today, I believe.
Okay.
Or either it ended today or it ended last, no, it ends today because it was a year, it was a
Okay.
year, that it applied to, and it started, I believe with April 1st, it might have started with March 1st, but I think it started with April 1st when the, ARPA bill was passed. So this just lays out the spending authority for the second year of the plan on page 7 and over onto the top of page 8. On page 8 in C106, this is the.
Right, so if we change any of the spending, for example, if we do an increase in an area that falls into,
If you decided to change the
then we'll have to
distribution
come
of
back,
these,
we'll
yeah.
have to come back and
Okay, adjust that, yeah.
right now,
And you did do that in the budget adjustment regarding the retention piece.
Yes,
You
yes.
changed from one bucket in here to another to accommodate the retention piece.
okay.
Page 8, section C106, this is a new section. This is the IT system. So tomorrow, the portal opens up on the cannabis board. It's a Salesforce based for applications. And we, in the budget adjustment, funded the new positions and closed the deficit in a special fund with $850,000. This spending authority, it's a little bit of a mystery at the moment, exactly how the board, if the board is actually got bills to pay on this, what spending authority they were able to enter the contract under. They're working with ADS. I've talked to Bran, I'm trying to find out how much is actually going to need to be paid on this system in FY '22. And this is phase 1, there's a phase 2, they haven't settled on a system yet, but you'll see it when we get to the '23 cannabis board budget. It's a little bit less than this, but roughly in the same ballpark. And so you'll have a choice to make in terms of whether or not you want to give the spending authority to the IT systems. how much, we may be able to cover this in cash in 22 and fund the rest of it in a construct that we've been talking about for, fully covering the board and changing maybe to a direct app, which I have that all laid out on a sheet when we get to
And
it.
that's gonna be critical centers, so you're gonna have to
Yeah.
help lead the
So-
charge with me on that.
So
Because of the fees just not covering the cost, and we're really gonna have to go back and reconstruct, how the money gets, divvied up, but
Yeah.
we can't just simply let the cost default to the
You
general
can't
fund.
have a,
And that was
you
never
can't,
the
you can't let a
intent,
$3
right?
million deficit sort of accrue year after year after year in
No,
the special fund.
How much is the total amount that we're covering in the deficit? Not just the,
So you covered 850 in the budget adjustment. And
For this
now,
year.
for this year, now this is adding another 7,750, but I'm gonna find out how much is actually 22.
and how much is 23?
And then how much is needed in 22, and if you could cover that with general fund. And then the question is, in 23, on an annualized basis, after fees, you are looking at something in the neighborhood of a $3 million deficit annually. Maybe a little bit less once you're past the IT piece. And so that would all come out of the general fund share. So I haven't talked to Michelle about the amendment yet, but I have a layout for the committee when we get to it, if that's the route you want to go to sort of cover the deficit
so it's
upfront.
It's a $3 million deficit every year going forward?
It might be more like 2.6, because you're expanding the number of positions up to 11.
And the fees could not be raised to the level because it would have, if they would have been too high. So we made a decision in the fee bill to remember those fees,
Yeah.
to make them reasonable, but what that did was
Create a wider gap in the
Yeah.
deficit side of that special fund.
I have to go back and say, when I've got the big guys from Toronto buying these companies for $25 million and we can't even cover our costs, it's ridiculous.
Well, we have a proposal that will cover the cost of operating the program. And your issue around, what we do with those big out-of-state interests are probably something that's still gonna come up.
I hope so.
So this one is one I would say is on hold for the correct 22 money amount, or the precise money, what's
Where
actually.
did this figure come from? How's
So
it
I believe it came, Robin Chai is the House member that has the cannabis board, and I believe the cannabis board approached, granted, they have a cost that they're looking at for the portal. But I'm trying to understand, since there was no actual spending authority of this size, given how they were able to go forward, because they didn't get an excess receipt from finance and management, as far as I know. So we're just trying to figure out, but they did work with ADS to, have the vendor and Salesforce open the portal that's supposed to be tomorrow.
Well, it seems like
And they have
they've spent money
Yeah.
before. If this
But they don't-
appropriation it's not a retroactive one, is it?
No, but the only other thing I wanted to say is they do have a mandate statute that says you have to have this open by April 1st. So.
So you're gonna have a sheet that outlines all the dollars for us?
All the dollars, and I think the IT, we want to keep separate from the actual annual operating in that construct, because it's easier
Yeah.
to understand.
But the big question is, did the board go ahead in order to meet the April 1 dedeadline?
And I believe it's clearly they did, and I don't think they sort of, they're new, so I don't know that they understood
That you
but
have
they did
to-
get advice from ADS around the spending authority to do it, so.
All right, well, we'll see if we can find out something more on that.
Well, I can talk to them.
Well, the question is, how much of it are they spending in order to bring up the system operational April 1st?
Yeah.
And then how much of it would flow into 23? But the problem is the appropriation is going to be, unless we make this effective upon, they've actually spent money with.
Yeah, so that's why this is in the C section, this piece of it's in the C section.
Yeah.
I just don't know if all 759 needs to be 22. They probably have some bills that they'll have to pay before June, but you can put part of it into 23.
Well,
And then you might have the
You should be
capacity
able
in
to
the
cover
general fund to cover it, so we don't actually, the point of putting the 850 in was actually not to have a deficit open up new in the capper in this arena, so.
Can you send me what it is we want to know from Brent, and I'll ask?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the question is, out of the 759, how much will be spent in 22?
Yeah.
And how much will be
Yeah.
carried into 23?
I think it's all of it.
And then I think she did indicate that the seed to sale phase 2 is not a done decision yet, but the cost of that is also around $700,000. That is in the House is recommend, the House is not doing anything about the deficit, they're letting that.
So they're opening Friday for licensing. That's gonna all be on paper? There's no portal?
No, they have,
Salesforce would be the portal.
they have, as far as I know, it opens tomorrow electronically through AES has been working with them, and Salesforce is the vendor or the
In
basis of.
Salesforce, we were using that product all over state government. So,
Yeah.
ADS is. It's not a new system, shall we say. It's.
We've been using it for,
All right, so
especially.
let me ask Dick, do you want
CRM money.
Stephanie to figure,
Yeah.
follow up on that? So it's
Yeah.
just one less thing for you to worry about. Why don't you, Stephanie, and see what the split is, and then we'll,
Yeah.
obviously we want to pay, our goal has been to minimize that in creating an internal service deficit before we got started, and then making sure that we have whatever changes in order to not have the cost of this be a general fund burden.
Well, if we have $2.6 million a year every year going forward.
And that's a lot higher than that.
That's not what any of us voted for.
No.
It's 3 times what, the size of the board itself,
Right.
in terms of positions, is 3 times what you
I think
now.
I think it was because the House added more conditions, more requirements, and did they change the size of the board?
Not until you did budget adjustment, the staff size of the
Oh,
board.
you're
They are
talking about
trying-
8 to
they
11,
are
yeah.
Putting more and more requirements, the House did put more and more requirements on it.
Yeah,
We did
Stephanie
expect
meant-
some true up in this process.
But 2.6 million is a
Yeah.
big,
But I think,
Annually.
yeah.
And you did, I mean, and the fees clearly, I mean, you had it, when you did this, you expected to set fees that could at least have a shot of.
I
covering
believe
the
that
annual-
once the money starts rolling in, we'll be okay. But right now, there's no income.
Yeah, I agree.
But we can set it up so that we get the cost of operating the program covered first,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then,
Yes.
and then the rest gets distributed according to.
Whatever comes in after that would be
Isn't that what
30,
happens
70
with
split.
lottery?
Yes, it is, or liquors, yeah.
Lottery and liquor, the administrative fee is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first paid, and then after that,
Yeah.
everything goes to the.
That's right, the
So
profits
your-
after that.
But your sheet will have the projected,
So-
of spending and the revenues.
And the excise tax revenue, you wouldn't touch the sales tax revenue, that would go to the ed fund. But you might have, construct would be that the excise tax revenue, tax department would still collect it, but it would flow through the board along with the fee revenue, and then a direct app after the board is paid for, and then that's what would split 70-30.
I have to say, the ed fund gets everything without paying for it.
Well,
And that way you're not creating a constant structural deficit in the
and
cannabis board.
I'm just pointing out,
Well, I would like to point out that we did have 2 successes. One of moving the normal cost of teachers' retirement and the normal cost of retired
it's like
teachers.
pulling teeth to have any successes.
Well, no one knows that more than I, and poor Mary, who was the beneficiary of my pummeling last spring.
I'm just saying,
C-107, I don't know, what time are we at, Christie, are we still okay?
Yeah, we've got another 7 and some maintenance.
All right,
So we're almost through the C section.
well, let's see if we can keep going on that.
C-107, this is part of the language that BSEC is, I think there's some confusion, you know, this is tied into H703 and the nursing programs that are in that. So to the extent that funds are unexpended here, which is last year's nursing and primary care physician funding, then they're available for the new program being set up in H703.
How many programs do we need to set up for nursing?
And so if you're,
I think we're about it.
so the H703, I think changes, sort of reconstructs this program in it. And so you might want to sort of hold this as part of the whole
I'm
package
gonna
that you
hold
get
this
on
because
the.
I want to
healthcare
look at what,
workforce.
because we obviously have money going out through the AHEC, the loan repayment that we've had for years, so Department of Health. And then we've got other different.
This was one time, we did it with sort of a hodgepodge of
I know,
money
one-
2 years ago. We did it with $2 million of one-time money batched up under global commitment.
Right.
And so not all of that has been expended, particularly on the primary care
Oh,
side
we're
yet.
gonna hold it.
And so I think Sarah Clark has got the sort of baseline together, what the House is proposing. And then but that would be all happening, I assume in the H103 world in the other committee.
There should be one
Sure.
nursing program statewide. That we fund to help retain, recruit, educate, whatever we need to do should be a nursing.
You know, and those traditional loans of repayment have flowed through the health department and through the AHEC. And that's where the ongoing, we're dealing with a lot of one-time here too. So we need to be clear on what's in the, out there on the long term. Okay, shall we go on to D100 then, or?
If we have time, and then we can start with D101 tomorrow. But this is where this is the annual language on the property transfer tax. In sub 2, that number 21,128,000, that is where the House added $10 million for the amount going to the PHCB.
So
So they increased, we have normally not withstood, and the House continues to not withstand the formula. The amount of the direct app on the general fund balance sheet would go down by $10 million because this appropriation to BHCB would go up by $10 million
so
from what the governor recommended.
So the governor didn't recommend the 21.
He recommended 11.
Oh, 11, okay.
So they put one-time general fund?
So, no, well, the one-timer base nature of it won't be a sort of a factor of what you decide next year, what the forecast is in the prorated extra tax, if you're going to give them 21 from the same source next year, or change
Well,
that.
where did the
from
10 come from, Stephanie?
It came from the general fund. It is a general fund expenditure. That is true. It's unclear whether, I mean, the House uses it as a base change, but every year you set this number. And so every year you set this number and the
So the
residual
House,
is the general fund piece.
all right, so what the House did was increase base by 10 million. It wasn't a one-time.
And they think of it as a base. It's just that it's not, there's nothing, this is the setting of this number. It's always,
I know.
the governor goes first, you go second.
I know.
And it's tied up in usually general fund capacity needs.
I know.
And then
Just so the sheet that you handed out, they talked about over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
We giving about 300 million
on the pandemic side.
on the pandemic side. Is none of that's in.
This is just the normal, this is the regular underlying flow of money that,
Well, that's obviously a policy decision we're gonna have to
I mean,
make.
this is usually the what's split half and half between housing, and roughly half and half between housing and conservation. And then on,
So
that's-
we're gonna,
We're gonna have to come back and look at what we have for spending and say, is that additional spending there? Do we need to make it a bit less? Do we not want to do it base? Do we want to do a one-time? Those are all the decisions that we have ahead of us.
the other change in this section is on page 10, sub 3. That $5.882 million. That is that is what is $2.1 million higher than last year's amount to the
And we
municipal.
already carved out 650.
The other bill. So that's the other change. The governor did recommend some of that increase. So compared to the governor, it's 2.1 compared to last year. That's the year over year increase. It's about 1.55 something compared to the governor, because he had included a bit of an increase in the planning arena.
Okay, so that's a base increase.
Yes.
Is that correct, Stephanie?
That would also be a base increase, but it may, if it's the same animal.
I know.
Yeah, there may be a different proposal next year.
So, can I just,
Yes, you may,
so,
if you can figure out what the question is.
well, so when I sit down with my regional planning people earlier this week,
They wanted the 2.1 plus the 650.
the 2.1 plus the 650, they said something to me about 11 million.
Yeah,
I don't know what that
nice.
is, but the planning side of this, 2.1 is the total increase over last year for municipal regional planning.
Okay,
Of that 2.1, 1.6 is on the regional side, and the remainder is on the municipal side.
how much of
1.65 is on the.
How much of this, because they get the property transfer tax and this is not withstood, would they get if it was not?
Oh, more than this.
Maybe
That
that's
may
the
be
11.
11.
Yeah, that may be the, yeah,
That's what,
that's probably true.
okay,
17% of the property transfer tax.
yeah, that's where they got the 11.
Yeah. So I think this is a place to stop for your next.
I think so, because we're going into D101, so why don't we stop here?
And I have Barbara Neal with us. I'm gonna pass out.
I don't think all of this is environmental. All this colored ink. See, I feel a little nervous about all this.
I know, well, somebody bought a new color copy. Look at all this paper that they use too.
I don't know. Well, because, okay,
So we're trying to understand how all this fits
with the dispatch,
with the dispatch, everything else that's going on.
Well, there's gonna be a lot of extra money somewhere,
Oh,
because we're funding, public safety and the fire departments are all going with private, so.
why don't we get started? And so I see we have Barbara Neal is here, and then we have the folks from the Agency of Administration, fiscal staff. So we have the document here, but I'm going to get started. Barbara, do you want to give us your budget presentation? As you know, we kind of do the highlights. We also want to have some discussion about dispatch, try to, Senator Sears has been working on how the 911 fits relative to that proposal that has been advanced by the administration as it relates to dispatch. And then anything else that might come up, because your budget's fairly straightforward, but I think this year the organizational and funding issues are pretty significant. So that's what we'd like to focus on, if you would, please.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sounds good. So for the record, I am Barbara Neal, Executive Director of the Enhanced 911 Board. And to help start answering some of those questions that you just mentioned, I'll give a quick refresher before I jump into the budget request for FY23 and remind you all that the Enhanced 911 Board was created in 1994 as the single governmental agency responsible for the statewide 911 system. The 911 Board does not have purview over dispatch or dispatch operations, nor does it have purview over responders or response agency operations. The 911 Board is an independent state board, not currently attached to any other state agency or department. However, we consult regularly with several state agencies and other stakeholders at the local, county, and state level. to meet our statutorily defined responsibilities. The 911 board itself is made up of 9 board members who represent state, local, and county law enforcement, emergency medical services, fire service, municipalities, and the public. The board staff consists currently of 10 full-time staff members and 1 part-time administrative support person. In 2021, the 911 system processed just under 237,000 911 calls. That's up about 13% from 2020. There were 475 text to 911 messages in the system in 2021, which was a big jump from the year before. It was up about 39% from the previous year. 75% of the 911 calls in Vermont are from wireless devices, cell phones. The average call time that a call taker spends on the phone with a 911 caller is just under 2 minutes. In those 2 minutes, the call taker identifies the nature and location of the emergency, asks the necessary questions to assess the situation, identifies and notifies the appropriate dispatch agency for the event and the location that the event is at, and provides any needed pre-arrival instructions to the caller to help prevent the situation, hopefully, from getting any worse before the first responders can arrive on scene. As you all know, the 911 board and the statewide 911 system have historically been funded through the Vermont Universal Service Fund. And I also know that you're aware that that fund has struggled with revenue shortfalls for the past many years, which has resulted in the inability of the fund to support the 911 program, along with the other programs that it is required to support. So the administration has recommended that funding for the 911 program be moved to the general fund. And that recommendation is reflected in our FY23 budget presentation and budget request of just under $4.6 million. My understanding is that House Appropriations has recommended that 911 to continue to be supported to the extent that it can through the Vermont Universal Service Fund, and that 911 costs that exceed the capacity of the fund should be from the general fund. The 911 board is not opposed to either approach and will simply stress that the 911 program needs a reliable and sustainable funding mechanism to support our operations and to allow us to properly plan for the continued health of the statewide 911 system, which is and always has been one of the best in the nation. So, as I said, we are requesting just under $4.6 million in FY23. That's an increase of about 2.7% from our FY22 request, due in large part to structural statewide pressures related to salary and benefits, some unrealized vacancy savings, increases in internal service charges and the ADS SLA costs, all of which are reflected on the ups and downs chart on page 9 of our budget presentation. I'll note that we have just completed a move of our office from the Capitol Plaza Hotel to a state-owned facility at 6 Baldwin Street. The move will result in savings in our operating costs, also shown on page 9 in the ups and downs. And it also provides a more appropriate office space for our program, since many of us are now continuing to work remotely. The new space also expands and improves our training and emergency operations center spaces. And I'm going to pause now, because that's about what I have for the budget request itself, and see which direction the chair would like to go with questions or having me explain our current challenges.
So the House, how much did they have to fill the gap with?
1.2.
1.2 is the gap. Okay. You've talked about it. I think you were talking about the sequence of which the funding from the Universal Fund is allocated and the impact that has. I'm surprised. Is it simply because of the move that you were able to come in at such a low increase? Because salaries and benefits for most other entities have been, would have put it higher than that.
I might need to have Brenda help me with the explanation on this. But
Simply because of that offset of 10,000 with the move. That's fairly, that's approaching almost $1,000 a month that you're saving right there.
Right.
Space is not insignificant. I do have a question. Most the calls come in on 911. Many of them might require a law enforcement response. So can you describe those calls and how they're handled? Do they then go to Department of Public Safety? Of course, we were paying for PSAP seats. Can you explain how different calls that come in at 911, how they're handled?
Sure. So it might help to understand that there are 6 public safety answering points in Vermont, 2 of which are operated by the Department of Public Safety at Williston and Westminster, and 4 of which we refer to as the regional PSAPs, not to be confused at this point anyway with regional dispatch. So the 911 PSAPs that are operated by non-state entities are at the Lamoille County Sheriff's Department, the Shelburne, Hartford, and St. Albans Police Departments. All of the 911 calls in Vermont are answered in one of those 6 facilities. Those 6 facilities also have dispatch responsibilities for certain responders in their jurisdiction or certain responders that they have contracted with to provide dispatch services. In addition, there are just over 40, I believe it is, other dispatch entities that serve Vermont, many of which are located in Vermont, some are located out of state, who provide dispatch services for other emergency response agencies. So when a 911 call comes in, the call taker determines where the emergency is and what responders are needed. If those responders are dispatched out of the same facility, the same PSAP that answered the 911 call, that call taker may turn to their radio equipment, their dispatch equipment, and send those responders. If the responsible agencies are not dispatched out of that PSAP, the call is transferred by phone to one of those 40 other dispatch centers serving Vermont. The information is relayed to the dispatch center, who in turn notifies their responders and gets the responders on their way to the event. So we're about 50-50 right now as to the number of calls that are dispatched out of the same facility that answers the 911 call or out of a separate dispatch entity. I'm hoping that answered your question.
It does. It's helpful. Thank you. So, for example, Lamoille County Sheriffs, if they answer the 911 call, would they dispatch for, or would that call get referred to public if the state police are necessary as opposed to the sheriff? Would they then?
It depends. It depends what town the emergency is in and who the responsible law enforcement agency is in that community. So it varies by town. There can be any number of combinations of responders that go to a town or a certain part of a town. Some towns, as you know, have their own police departments.
Right.
Some do not, and they're covered by the state police perhaps. So it's all dependent on where the emergency is.
Who pays?
I'm sorry?
Who pays
Who pays for?
for the service? Let's say it's, let's say it's somebody out of Westminster. And the agency is the Bennington, Vermont Police Department. Who pays for that dispatch?
That is all dependent on contractual relationships between the dispatch agencies or the agencies that provide dispatch services and the emergency responders needing that dispatch service. So we are, and there are various models that I'm aware of in place at the at dispatch centers for how those fees are calculated. This is not my day-to-day work. As I mentioned in the beginning, we do not have purview. We, the 911 board, does not have purview over dispatch agencies or their operations. So, so I am not the expert to be talking about, you know, how those costs are determined. Or
Department of Public Safety or the Lamoille County Sheriff's Office?
well, both. I mean, the Department of Public Safety provides dispatch services for some agencies and obviously for the state agencies. Lamoille County Sheriff's Department provides dispatch services for many agencies in Lamoille County and also Barry Town. So they would be able to address how they calculate the fees for dispatch. And we've mentioned those too, but also the St. Albans Police Department has dispatch responsibilities, Shelburne, Hartford.
So Barbara, what you pay for is answering the call and then the time involved to refer it to the whatever dispatch entity has jurisdiction.
Right. So, so there is in our budget.
Unless you, as you said, unless you're at the same site as a dispatch for that area, then they would just simply turn and do it. But the 911 function is to answer, determine how to direct that situation to the right dispatch, and then they take it from there.
Yes, that's a good explanation of it. And just for clarity, in our budget request, there is $1,080,000 that we use to help offset the cost for the PSAPs who do take 911 calls. So we have a memorandum of understanding with each of those agencies that they will answer the 911 calls in accordance with certain performance metrics, and also provide backup services to the other public safety answering points. And in exchange for that, we provide a stipend really to each of those centers based in part on the number of 911 workstations that are housed in their facilities, and in part on the actual 911 call volume that they take each year. So it varies a bit from year to year because the call volume can vary a bit from year to year.
So
but
years ago, we used to call the state police. Now you call 911. So a lot of the calls that would have gone to the state police now go through 911. So it's an interesting, and then you would decide whether it would be it seems like 911 is assumed some of the workload that would have been years ago would have gone through calling the state police. But Senator Westman's got a question.
So, and you know, maybe Senator Sears has asked the question. How is the two 911, the calls that go in, how are the employees different there than at any of the other four? I used to think there was a payment that went back that didn't equal the cost to the other four. A straight payment per seat.
You may be remembering, but in the past, I think it was prior to 2017, we did reimburse the PSAPs based only on the number of workstations that they had in their facility. So that might be what you're remembering.
Yeah.
We changed that in 2017 or 18, and I can get your precise date if you need it.
I don't need precise. I just.
Okay. So that we could account for the actual call volume that was being handled too. So now essentially half of the reimbursement is based on the number of 911 workstations housed in the facility, and the other half is based on actual 911 call volume that's handled at the facility.
So how would the payment for those calls and that half that is seat differ between the two state facilities and the other four?
Well, the Department of Public Safety has historically answered nearly 70% of the statewide 911 call volume. There are, I'm sure you're aware of some critical staffing issues that are going on in those facilities, and that call volume has dropped significantly from those historical values. Back in the middle of 2021, their call volume capacity dropped to just under 55% and has been hovering around the 60% mark for the past several months. So when you think of the change in the call volume from 70 to 55 or 60% of the call volume, that will impact their reimbursement because they're handling fewer calls, right? And those calls are not going unanswered, I should stress. The 911 system is designed so that if one PSAP cannot answer a 911 call for any reason, that call will automatically and seamlessly go to another PSAP that does have an available call taker. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So what I was just going to add, so that means that as the Department of Public Safety's call volume capacity has decreased over the past several months, there's a corresponding increase in the call volume in the regional public safety answering points.
That's what you're hearing.
So half of the payment that goes back follows the number of calls you get, whether it's whatever it is in the 6 call centers. Half of their funding is that. The other piece of their funding is still by the seat.
Yes, currently, yes.
And the seat in the 2 state centers are the same as the other 4, the same dollar amount per seat?
Yes, it's $22,500 per year per 911 workstation.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Senator Starr?
Yeah. Public safety, I believe it was, they were in talking about switching to 4 more regional dispatch centers. How is that going to improve our overall system?
I think probably the commissioner, Sherling, could address the benefits of that proposal better than I. I can tell you that the 911 board is involved in those discussions really to this extent. So if there were to be additional regional dispatch centers in Vermont, some or all of them may want to take 911 calls themselves for the communities that they're going to serve. And the 911 board would be able to, or is the agency that would be responsible for determining whether or not it was appropriate or they were well suited to take 911 calls as opposed to some other public safety answering point. So some of those regional centers may become 911 PSAPs and some may not. And the board is the one that will make that decision when we get there. The board does try to the extent that it can to minimize what we call 2-stage call taking, that situation where a call is answered in one center and then transferred to another. But as I said in the beginning, we're about at 50-50 right now with our ability to do that, right? So where we can have a situation where a PSAP is also the dispatch agency, we will move in that direction. But it would be, I'm not in a position now to say whether or not the board would consider, well, they'll certainly consider, but I don't know that they will approve any or all of those additional facilities becoming 911 call centers. Really, it's a matter of crossing that bridge when we get to it.
Well, what concerns me is there's a little price tag hooked to that, like 11 million dollars, if I remember right. There's quite a lot of extra money that's gonna have to be spent. And if we aren't gonna realize some improvement in the system, why would we go in that
Well,
direction.
that's what Senator Sears is, that's police dispatch.
Yeah.
And,
I think that's why the Department of Public Safety's proposed more regional locations so that they can hire people, so that they can provide the service.
and then, of course, the SEA wants them to be state employees.
Yeah, that's okay.
Understood.
Other questions of Barbara and how that system works. So obviously, if you add more regional dispatch, then you would have, those calls would, well, depending on, once you take the calls, would you have more stations or would you just have more entities that you've got to refer the call out for the dispatch function?
Right now, there's no, I would not make a recommendation to the board that we add more 911 workstations to the system. Rather, I think that if there were new facilities that came on board that were willing and able, let's say, to become 911 PSAPs, we would move existing workstations to those facilities. And there would be a cost for that, just so you're aware. I'm not sure how much of that cost has been included in the discussion to date on the dispatch issue. Because as I said, the decision about whether or not they would be 911 centers hasn't actually been made yet. But it does cost if we were to bring another facility on board as part of the 911 system, to get that facility connected to the 911 system and have all the connectivity that's necessary for that. And as a ballpark figure, when the Rockingham Barracks moved to Westminster, it was kind of a similar thing where we had to stand up, we had to bring the 911 system to that new facility. And that was about a $48,000 or $50,000 price tag. So those costs vary depending on what kind of connectivity already exists in the facility. But that might be one stake in the ground for kind of assessing those costs.
Thank you. We could spend a lot more time on this, and I know Senator Sears has been having conversations about it. In terms of the budget, it's pretty straightforward. Your funding source doesn't cover the cost, and the gap has been covered by general fund. I know that you've talked about the sequencing of what money goes first, and we'll be taking a look at that. So, yes.
So the gap for the two state centers has been covered via the general fund. The local, because you're doing 50% and 50%, gets you in something into the low 40,000%. But the amount above that, is that been covered by the general fund, or is that covered by the local centers?
I imagine it.
I think the
I don't
local,
think it's any other, if there's no other stream that's going through the locals, it has to be covered at the local level.
it's covered at the local level,
Right.
so,
So they're absorbing some of the,
yes.
all right, thank you, Barbara, we appreciate it. We're gonna have to kind of move on because we've got a couple of other people in the waiting room. So the issue is much bigger than your budget as it relates to some of the proposals, including reorganizing the 911 board, which now is over in the House. So I hope you have an opportunity to justify there.
Yes, that is my plan, is to voice our position on the proposed governance change over in the House.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry that whatever happened. So we will move on to Heather Simons at Vermont Criminal Justice Council. I guess this is your section of the budget too, Senator Sears? Okay, so Heather is on. Yes, up in the right-hand box. And so why don't we get started? We have folks from Agent Finance and Management here as well. So we have your document, and if you would like to just give us a run through of the budget as is being requested, and any high points or other issues that you'd like to raise. We have some time to do that, so we'll start with the document that we have that really talks about your budget summary and your highlights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
With you, you're by yourself, Heather, except for the fiscal folk from finance and management.
Yes, I'm by myself. I might have a training assistant walk in with a note on it with a yellow sticky, but that could happen in any second.
No, I didn't know if you had other staff you wanted to introduce. That was all.
We're pretty spread thin. They're probably up to their necks, but thank you very much for having me. For your time. For the record, Heather Simons, Executive Director of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, and my right and left hand, Jason Pinard and Brenda and Holly, have been a tremendous help to me. I'm just coming into this position. It feels like 5 minutes, but it's almost a year now. So they've been critical in bringing me along in terms of how the budget's been managed with the council and with the last executive directors. And I've certainly learned a lot about how we're tracking everything in the last year. And Jason, jump in anytime. Don't let me go too far down the wrong way. There's been a tremendous amount of change. I think folks know that just within the last year, a little over. One of the most critical changes is the expansion of the council to 24 members, and as well as the mandates that came with that included change in direction for the executive director and the added committees and subcommittees, as well as a substantial amount of work with response to the law enforcement hiring crisis. So we've been working within the basic budget and trying to plan for pretty much, that and what everyone else has been managing, which is COVID response. Jason, is there anything do you want to jump in, or should I just keep going?
That's totally your call, whatever.
Yeah, I know. No, I know it is. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just,
I kind of,
So,
sounds like you're doing a great job. So if you want to keep rolling, feel free.
I have a question. You mentioned the statewide hiring problem for police or law enforcement. Isn't that true everywhere in the state? Is it specifically problems for hiring law enforcement?
Or is it worse in law enforcement?
Oh, I think, for those of you that don't know, I came over here from a long career in corrections and was working for the last couple of commissioners. And so I think corrections is certainly experiencing the same crisis in terms of recruitment. I know that there's always discussion around making sure that we make the distinction between recruitment and retention and how they're related to culture. But to answer your question, I think it is difficult right now for a lot of reasons in law enforcement that include what we're facing nationally with regards to the profession changing, public trust, what's at risk. It's certainly a commitment, and people put a lot on the line, and recruitment efforts have to be more creative, and they have been, certainly in Vermont, as hard as it is. My experience is that we are very creative in this state, that agency heads are open to expanding the applicant pool, committed to diversity and inclusion. And here at the Academy, the same thing, which is making sure that we pay attention to instructional strategies and learning strategies and making sure that we accommodate all of that. But it's very difficult, and I am with our staff trying to partner as much as we can to support law enforcement.
Is it, of all the people who start, like if 20 recruits start in the program, how many complete?
Well, what we have in the last year, we don't have a cap anymore. That's not easy, and it's certainly a challenge here, but it has been one of the strategies that we've committed to so that agency heads don't have to wait for a graduation. So our classes are a little bigger. This one has 46 participants. We usually lose a couple. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to predict, but it's not a ton, and that's not the plan. There's an incredible amount of vetting that goes in before they get here. Once they get here, they really want to be here.
So if we look at your programmatic performance measures, you have a percent of graduates. This is level 3 certification. Number of seats, 84. Number enrolled, 84. And the percent of graduates, is it 80% or is it 80 out of the 84? I assume it says percent graduates, so I'm assuming that was previous for this period. 80. Is that?
Yeah.
Could you, so 83% graduate the level 3 certification. Is that how we should read that as one of your performances?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, this is attachment A2. Then you've got level 2 certification, and then you have the K-9 in-service and K-9 training.
Yeah.
And, obviously, K-9 is a smaller number. So there are, that's just before the ups and downs sheet that we have that information.
Thank you.
And the same is true for compliance. You've got domestic violence, impartial, and so forth. So that's kind of helpful in the metrics. Okay. The budget is fairly straightforward. You're moving by the total, I guess, of 3.1 up to 3.4, which is
Cut it, make them not work.
well, they have to.
Every increase in the structural stability.
You've created those buckets, and sometimes that column is empty. Other times it's a force fit, pretty obvious. But I'm sure there must be some merit to it, but that has nothing to do with you, Heather. That's something that seems to be on the 5th floor. Other questions about the budget? It's pretty straightforward. So your request is the governor's recommended 3.4 million. On
Yes.
ups and downs, and
The 200,000 down,
well, the 196.
196.
That's change in personal services, so that must be in terms of staffing or contracts. Do you want to explain that? The big down is a total of 196,971. Maybe Jason can answer that question.
Yeah, so last year in the budget, there was 2 new positions put into the budget. During the budget process, there was no position numbers created for them yet. So they were booked in the other personal services account code. It was booked at $100,000 per position. This year, with them having position numbers, they're now showing up in the salary and benefit account codes.
Okay, so all it did was move from one line to the other.
Absolutely, yes.
Thanks, Jason.
You're welcome.
Any other questions we have with the budget? Thank you. And so where are you, Heather? Are you, is your office in?
It's in Pittsford at the academy.
That's what I assume. But you're also working remotely, or I'm just wondering.
I'm working all the time. That's pretty
Oh,
good.
good. Well, I was gonna say the backdrop is lovely, your
Yes,
fireplace.
this is the office. It used to be the computer lab. And as you know, we are a full service bed and breakfast, so I sleep here pretty regularly as well. And I go between here and Woodstock, South Woodstock, Vermont.
Thank you, thank you. Other questions? Is there room for more students if they were out there to find?
Yep, the East Cottage was completed just about a month ago. And that's used by Vermont State Police for their pre-basic. It's also available to us if we need flow over. And they're very creative here, the staff, with regards to how to split up training. It does get challenging. I know that now's not the time to get into all that they do, but I just do need to say that what they have been able to figure out with large classes is pretty remarkable. Dividing them in half, sending half to the range and doing and half driving or evac training, as they call them. They're very intuitive about learning needs. We have done back-to-back academies with no break. It's been a long time since they've had a vacation. Part of changing the schedule required they were outside a lot this winter. It was really cold. So there's all kinds of things that we've done to make sure that we step it up for our partners. But it's definitely been a challenge. I think beds are not a big concern right now with the completion of the East Cottage.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm sorry, we would love to have you testify in person, and thank you for your presentation. Other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We have next we have Tor Yang with the Vermont Human Rights Commission. Here she is before.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good. Haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah, it has been a while.
I know. Are you not having to make that commute? You live in Pittsfield, is it, or?
I live in Woodstock now, but
What's
we are working in a hybrid fashion. So that there's always someone at the physical office in Montpelier. So I'm there 3 days a week and then working from home 2 days a week.
Well, welcome. We will go through your budget, which is probably pretty straightforward, but gives you a chance to sort of brief us on what has happened application over the last year and highlights of the budget and sort of where you see the challenges, but what may have been something you're really pleased in terms of what the commission has experienced or done over since we've done your presentation.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your time today and consideration. I know that you all are familiar with the Human Rights Commission and the work of the Human Rights Commission, so I won't spend too much time talking about our mission. As you know, we are statutorily obligated to enforce the anti-discrimination laws of the state. In addition to that, we do a lot of policy work by testifying before the legislature, serving on committees and task forces. And also we have an obligation under the law to provide trainings and outreach and so forth. The laws that fall under our statute, our jurisdiction is the Fair Housing Act, the Public Accommodations Act, the Fair Employment Practices Act, the retaliation provisions of workers' compensation and parental family leave, as well as flexible working condition. The one thing I want to remind people always is that places of public accommodations in the state of Vermont has a very broad definition. So this is beyond your commercial entities or your businesses that provide goods and services to the general public. This isn't just your gas station or your Walmart, but this also includes hospitals, It includes all governmental entities. And that would include Department of Corrections, that would include police entities as well, and schools also. So that brings in a lot of different types of cases at the Human Rights Commission. Interestingly, too, that when the flexible working condition law was passed a few years ago, we didn't have a lot of cases, but because of COVID, it has brought some interesting cases in the door. And in addition to that, we've had some interesting cases around reasonable accommodations in the workplace. So prior to COVID, sometimes there were employees who needed to work from home. They either because of they needed to care for a loved one, they were a parent, or they had a disability, which made it difficult for them to really drive or get transportation to a physical location. And previously, we had a lot of employers arguing that you had to work in the office. And what we've learned through the pandemic is that that wasn't necessarily true. So sort of those arguments that we have traditionally been used to in terms of like people having to show up in the physical office have kind of gone away because of COVID. And it's brought in some really interesting cases in the door around flexible working conditions. The commission is made up of 5 commissioners who are appointed by the governor and then are confirmed by the Senate, and then 6 staff positions, including myself, the executive staff assistant, the director of policy, education, and outreach, and 3 staff attorney investigators. Right now, we only have 2 because we are short-staffed and we're actively recruiting. And we don't really have a full-time litigator. And I think I've shared that with the committee members before, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. But if you're following along with the slide, I'm actually on slide 6, where the tree stump is this fiscal year. This fiscal year has been really interesting. The governor's moratorium, the closures of school, and various places of public accommodations have had an impact on the number of calls that we have received at the HRC. Interestingly, we received significantly less, but we've opened almost the same amount of formal complaints as we did in the previous years. The number of settlement cases have gone up. So the number of cases that we have settled, and more cases are reaching the final determination stage, meaning more cases are getting before the commissioners for them to vote on. And we are involved in more litigation than ever. And some of that is due to the fact that this committee and the legislature gave us some funds last year to support litigation at the Human Rights Commission. The commission has put on about 50 trainings and participated in events, and we have reached around over 2,000 people in the state of Vermont. We have done a lot of trainings around implicit bias, civil rights, but people are sort of advancing in their understanding around equity and are wanting more specific trainings that are focused on their area of expertise and knowledge and their work. And that is requiring a lot more time to develop curriculum specific to entities. And while we love to do that, we sometimes do turn people away because we don't have the ability to sort of do that kind of curriculum development. I mentioned earlier that we advance policies by serving on various task forces, and one of the slides shows you the committees and working groups that the HRC is currently serving on. And I understand that there's some bills right now that continue to name us too, so that's interesting. There are different protected classes of people that fall under the different categories. You know how cases come to the HRC, they file a complaint, we open an investigation. If we can't resolve it through conciliation or mediation, we'll issue a report. That report goes to the commissioners. They vote on it. If they find that there is reasonable grounds to believe discrimination occurred, we try to settle it before we could file a lawsuit. We did decline to accept a few cases from June through September 2021 because we were short-staffed. We are short-staffed right now, but we're making a decision to sort of exercise discretion as to how many of those cases that we can take. But being short-staffed is sort of just the thing that has been typically a thorn at the Human Rights Commission. Just some of the slides really just talk about the number of cases that we settled and gone to the HRC. I want to give some examples. I'm on slide 14, giving some examples of the cases at the Human Rights Commission. Some of these you may be familiar with.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Before you leave it, I'm just wondering, when you say you declined to accept cases, did you triage those and decide that you could afford not to accept these cases, or was there no examination of those cases during that period at all?
So we did discuss that, and we made a decision to do no examination of the cases. And the reason for that was the examination that we do at the intake stage is not very good in terms of, like, we don't know the true merits of a case. It is sometimes often the case that a case may appear more meritorious and then not be after an investigation, or a case that doesn't initially appear very meritorious that after an investigation is. And so we made a decision that we would not have sufficient information at that stage to really decide the merits of a case. The other issue too is that people don't necessarily have to come to the Human Rights Commission to file their claims. And so we thought that it would be better not to exercise discretion over those cases and to just say no for a period of time to cases. And we actually did that in all cases except housing. So I should have mentioned that. We continue to review housing cases just because it was important. And we also have a grant with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
It did, thank you.
Yeah. So some of the cases that we've done at the Human Rights Commission are a woman who was deaf went to the hospital with chest pains. She was not provided an ASL interpreter for 3 days. We recently just closed out another case where an interpreter wasn't provided for someone through some very significant procedures. A state employee who heard the N-word on a daily basis filed a complaint when they failed to address that. An aging man with dementia was held in a correctional facility after he spat at an officer. He was scheduled for an evaluation, but there was no room for him at the hospital. So he ended up in a correctional facility and then segregated for a prolonged period of time because correctional officers don't necessarily know how to address some of those issues. A family of Mexican heritage experienced ongoing harassment from their neighbors for their national origin. A woman with a hearing disability was denied hearing aids that her medical professionals deemed were necessary for her. And a woman was subjected to sexual harassment by her landlord's partner, who was walking into her apartment without permission and unannounced, made sexual comments about her body and more. So these are the different types of cases. It is taking us a very long time to close cases, close to a year on average. But I do want to say that there are cases that take 2 to 3 years to close. Some of those are school cases, unfortunately. Some of those are hospital cases. Some of those are employment cases or public accommodations cases. And the reason for that is we are routinely short-staffed. In fact, sadly, after this testimony, I have to call somebody back because they are upset that their case has taken such a long time. And I have no real good answer except that we are short-staffed. Why is it a problem other than people are upset that it's taking us a long time? Well, if it's taking a long time at the Human Rights Commission, it is possible that people are losing their right to sue under the statute of limitations. People lose faith and hope in the process. People are dropping out and witnesses are disappearing. So it does have an impact on cases and whether those cases ultimately get heard by our courts. We need a full-time litigator and we need a full-time, another staff attorney investigator. Now, I make this request every year, and I do want to say that last year when I did ask for it, you all did deliver with some one-time transfer from the general fund to our special fund. The HRC has a special fund that was created by statute for the purposes of litigation only, and it can only be used for litigation. And in response to my request for a litigator, you did appropriate some money to the HRC one time. And I do want to just say thank you for that, because that did allow us to contract with some attorneys for litigation purposes. And that's why we've been able to litigate several cases. We're in litigation now, whereas before we would have turned these cases away because we don't have a full-time litigator. But I am still in need of a staff attorney investigator to move these cases forward and faster, and to relieve the burden on my staff, to stop turnover, to make sure that people have a good work-life balance, and also to move cases. And a one-time appropriation would not fix it, because, again, the statute around our special funds is specific to litigation. So we cannot use any of that money for investigation purposes. And
Bora, just a question then. The budget ask is what you asked of the administration, but it wasn't accepted or not reflected in the budget as the governor proposed it.
Yes. I ask for this every year, and I ask for it in all the meetings around the budget. I just want to say, for what it's worth.
We did give you a position a couple years ago.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. You gave me a director of policy, education, outreach. And that was for the purposes of education and training purposes. But that individual does not do any enforcement.
No, I knew that we had done a position, but it's hard to remember what we did even last week, much less a couple years ago. But thank you for refreshing my memory on that.
The truth is that we've always needed these positions, but it is really hard to make such an ask. And so I asked for them in that first year. I made a request for the director of policy, education, and outreach, because I knew that there might be support for that. But did I need a litigator and a staff attorney investigator then as well? Yes, of course. I just didn't see that there would necessarily be momentum or support for 3 brand new positions at the HRC immediately, especially in my first year. But we have always needed these positions. And so yes, my ask is for a staff attorney investigator. I know that sometimes we look to the governor's recommended budget as sort of the basis. And I just want to say that the HRC should be unique in terms of what you consider for our budget, because we are an entity that was created by the legislature, and we're an entity that is designed to be independent and enforces the laws against the government and government entities. And so our mission and our goals and our objectives and powers come from the legislature. So I also ask that the support for our work comes from the legislature as well, because it needs to. And I just want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Senator Starr.
Yeah. You have 3 staff attorneys now, right?
I have 3 staff attorney positions and 2 are filled.
So why isn't the 3rd one filled?
We're hiring right now for it.
Okay, then later in the pamphlet that you sent out, that from June 2021 through September 2022, you declined to accept cases. So what was that deal?
I should clarify that was a clerical mistake. It should say September 2021. It was for only a few months. It was June 2021 to September 2021. I did actually follow up in the House with a revision, but I realized that the Department of Finance had done me the favor of sending you that testimony, and it contained that clerical error. So it was only a few months.
That's a little different, 3 months and a year and 3 months is
That's
quite.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator Bruce.
Just very quickly, Board, so I understand you're asking for a new attorney, but am I correct that you are bringing on now a third staff attorney investigator that you hadn't previously filled?
No, so we've always had 3 staff attorney positions.
Yeah.
And one is just vacant right now.
No, I understand, but you were describing a workload that was, necessary for an extra.
Yes,
litigant. So,
it's not because of the vacancy. We are overburdened even with the 3 staff attorneys. So yes, it's not because of the vacancy, but I will say that vacancies happen and turnovers happen because people are overworked. But people are overworked even when there were 3 full-time staff attorney investigators. The vacancy only creates the dilemma with what kind of case, whether we can accept cases coming in. But the request for the 4th staff attorney investigator is so that we are not spending 2 to 3 years before an investigation is completed.
when did that third position go vacant?
I think like a month or 2 ago.
Oh, I see. Oh, so
Yeah.
it's a very recent development.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? That's not, thank you very much for, we'll add your request to the growing list. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. And I want to thank you all so much for giving me the time and asking some really great, wonderful questions. And if you come up with any additional questions, I'm happy to provide that testimony and just, I appreciate it. And regardless of the decision you make, thank you for this time and thank you for really considering this request and supporting the work at the Human Rights Commission. So thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Christina? Yes. So we're moving. Yeah, I think somebody in the governor's, on the 5th floor must have.
Same picture.
No, Rick, no, I'm talking about must own stock in the, printer cartridges.
No, that would be me, I'm the printer.
They send them electronically.
Oh, they send them all.
Yeah, they do it all electronically, so in case you want to see them on your iPad, you can do that too.
I see, okay.
Do you have a copy?
Christina, are you all set? Do you need a copy?
What?
I have a copy. Okay, great, yes.
Chrissy had a copy.
So we're gonna move on to the State Ethics Commission. And if you wanna introduce yourself to the record, we will then have you go through your budget request. Probably unlike the House, we won't get into the same level of detail because we have to serve on 2 committees, but welcome, Christina.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Christina Severett. I'm the Executive Director of the Ethics Commission. I've been in this position since early November 2021. And I'll say during the House deliberations, it was actually very short and sweet. So I can do the same here if you'd like. Essentially, we're asking for the same base budget as we asked for last year with a 2.9% increase. The main difference is that we've actually hired administrative assistants. This was a position that was created by the legislature in July of 2021, but wasn't funded at that time. So in addition to our base amount of $1,116, $375, sorry, $1,116,575, we're asking for an additional $37,000 on top of that. And that's in addition to the 2.9% increase over last year. And it basically covers salaries and general office operating costs.
Where is your office?
It's on 6 Baldwin Street.
Okay, so you didn't have too far to come.
No, and I was in here earlier today testifying for another committee. So.
Could you repeat that number, 37?
Sure, it's the base number is $116,575 plus an additional $37,000 for the salary for our administrators.
Is that on you? That's
It's,
I can
that would
say
be in addition to that.
to the 116.
Yeah, I got the 30 something.
apologize, I can give you the final amount. It's $153,575.
So the governor's request is 116, but you would like additional funding?
Yes, so this was for a position that was created by the legislature, and my understanding is that there was a request that we make the request for the funds ourselves. So right now we're using, we have some general fund money, there's one-time funds that we got to start off the ethics commission.
So
So that's what
I
we're
think the
using
House
to.
added in one-time money with the directive to fold it into the internal service fund next year. I think that's what the House position is on.
All right, thank you.
It's currently in the big bill as a general fund, but I think the intention was to put it in the internal service fund next year.
Yes, that's what Stephanie was saying. Thank you for confirming that.
Mhm.
So if you want to just give us a sort of an update on the work, you've been in the position for
Since early November 2021, so I think it's close to about 5 months now. And so our largest project has been to try and get the Code of Ethics and Statutory Code of Ethics passed. So passed unanimously in the Senate last week, and it's now the House Government Operations
Oh,
Committee.
no, we were there. We voted for it.
Great, wonderful. So it's now with the House Government Operations Committee. We had possibly our final day of testimony today. I know the chair indicated her intention she wants to get out of the committee at the end of this week. I don't know if that will come to fruition, but that was it.
And can you give us, and probably it's in here, some sense of what, in the last 5 months, really what, the major activities that you've been focused on as the.
Sure, the major activities have been legislative activities. So I started in November, so it was kind of starting from the ground up. So it was learning office procedures. We hired an administrative assistant. We, doing some catch up in terms of we hadn't had an administrative person before. And so kind of like reviewing things that were outstanding, starting to work on our website, but it's largely been focused on legislative activities, research. We met weekly with the Senate Ops Committee. And so kind of doing research and responding to requests, and there's really been a focus on that. I'm part-time as well as administrative assistant, so that takes up a large amount of time. We've been in the news more recently, so a number of requests for guidance our office has been receiving has increased during that time. So that's also been part of the activities, but it's been largely focused on a code of ethics research. When that is eventually passed, we hope, then that's going to increase the workload of our office significantly because I'll be able to move into more training in particular.
So we have the number of complaints, interesting municipal complaints. And how they did the spells.
And so that anecdotally, that's made up about half of the calls that we get. We don't have jurisdiction over municipal complaints, so there is a demand for information when it comes to asking for guidance or questions about certain behaviors or not. The other large category of questions we get are about conflict of interest, and that's both for state, it relates to state public servants, but as well as municipal public servants.
That's why I wasn't on the pension committee.
Yeah, you're gonna be brought up.
Yeah, because I could have been accused of feathering my own nest, right? Except the legislature has to be sanctioned by the legend, so they dealt with it by not creating the conflict to begin with. So other questions or information people would like to get while we have Christina here?
Pretty modest.
Yeah, I know, in terms of the budget, we don't need to, it shouldn't be connected to the importance of the work you're doing, so, but it is relative to some of the budgets we see, it's pretty straightforward, and it's also nice in terms of people asking, trying to get guidance, and because oftentimes we have the same thing, should I vote for this? Because of this reason, and that's a pretty high bar for us to have a conflict of interest. Otherwise, no farmer could vote on a ag bill, or no teacher could vote on an education bill, or whatever. So, other comments you'd like to make or information? I realize you're coming in maybe a year from now, you have a lot more. Should we have a bill? No.
Yes, I do anticipate next year we'll have more needs in terms of like trainings and startup costs related to trainings. We are, assuming this passes in time for this to be enacted, are going to go into effect on July 1st. We'll be using our one-time startup funds that we got a few years ago to create a basic training, but in the future, we'd like to expand the training options.
So I guess I'm wondering, was the bill that passed, which you're apparently very familiar with, you work on it, but does it look like all parts of it are workable?
Yeah, it does to me. So I think we had extensive debates with the Senate Ops Committee. And so I do feel like every stone has been, overturned, looked under. And so it's pretty solid. It's a modest bill. I'll say it's a modest bill. It's a good framework though to build upon and start with things.
So Christine, are you an attorney?
Yes.
You are. But I don't think does the executive director have to be an attorney?
Yes, that was a requirement in the job.
Yeah.
The job description.
I wasn't sure.
I'm an attorney. I'm from Vermont. I went to law school actually in Hawaii, but I've worked with the Department of Education when I was the Department of Education here, and I worked in licensing professional standards.
You were in Hawaii?
Oh, wow. Yeah, yes.
Oh, University of
Yes, University of Hawaii for law school. And then I came back and I worked briefly again at the
So what
legal counsel's
island,
office.
that's not at Hilo though, that's one of your.
Oahu.
Came back right to Vermont.
Yes. Well, I worked in Washington DC for a number of years before law school and then after law school.
Well, thank you. Other questions or comments?
It's nice to have you. No, thank you for having me. It's nice to finally have some meetings in person.
Well, it's also nice that we're hearing from you after we voted on a bill that, obviously the committee next door had been spending a lot of time on, and it had a lot of visibility in terms of, what was included and how it worked and so forth. So thank you.
Thank you all for voting for it.
An interesting little quote here from Potter Stewart, Vermont guy.
Obscenity guy, right?
I know, when I see it.
You're saying you're.
I'm from Barry originally.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Oh, you're talking about Chris Carter?
No. I don't know, it just says.
Well,
Potter
thank
Stewart.
you,
It's on the
I know it's
I
hard
see.
being the last witness at 4 o'clock, but we appreciate you coming in, and probably we'll see you either more this session or for anybody who's running again. I see that you look at campaign finance reports.
Yes, I think that's with the Secretary of State's office. So that would be the first point of contact, but we do answer questions about going out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What do we do if we're running a deficit? Campaign finance.
We call that an out-of-pocket conversation. So, yes.